Episode 93 of the Interpretation Station is called To Order. Welcome, everybody. How is everyone doing on this Sunday, the 3rd of October? Here in Geneva today, outside, it's about 4:30 in the afternoon. Absolutely horrible day outside. Pissing it down with rain. I had big plans for today, big plans. And it's just rubbish. So I was here in my room, just sort of not doing anything particularly constructive. So I thought, what the hell? Let's rattle off a quick episode of the Interpretation Station. Take advantage, make the best of a bad situation, as we say. And as this is an episode for my Russian viewers, and it's a bit of a special episode, if you don't mind my saying. It's a bit different from what we usually do. Now, today's episode is going to be built on an episode that I did a couple of months ago, and it was called Prying Apart Russian Butt-Clenchers. Oh, yes. And what happened was, so in that episode, we looked at various tactics, strategies, approaches for basically dealing with syntax when going from Russian, when interpreting from Russian into English, just ways that we can make our life easier. So we don't, often the problem with Russian is, it's the challenge is changing the syntax, turning objects of sentences into subjects, turning actives into passives, and vice versa. Now, after I published that video, one of my fans, we shall, for the purposes today of this show, we shall call him JB. JB, okay? Hence the name in the title, okay? JB's Teasers. It's a bit not as rude as Butt-Clenchers, so we'll say JB's Teasers. JB wrote to me a long email asking me for advice on various Russian, taking all these examples from Russian statements and asking me the best way of approaching them, best way of dealing with them. And I was initially going to write back to him, and then I thought, geez, that's going to take some time. And I thought to myself, the substance of this email, it's so good. There's all these examples that he gives us in the email. Examples that would have taken me ages to find. So he's really done the hard work actually for us, says old JB, and asking me specifically how in each sort of scenario I would go about interpreting that. And I thought, wouldn't it be great actually to do an episode, a lot of different examples that he gives, that it may have to actually go to 2 episodes. But I think it's great that we can just look at it, take all those examples that he's given us, and I can put ideas out there for you as to how you might want to approach these sentences. Now, the solutions I'm going to give you, they're not going to be conclusive. They're just how I would approach them, okay? And is there really just to give you, as they say at the United Nations, food for thought. So, without further ado, let us turn to JB's mail that he sent. Okay, so just to give you a bit of context, so in his mail he wrote, first, thank you so much for video episode 66, Prying Open Russian Syntactic Butt-Clenchers. Very useful to have some solutions that don't involve weak constructions, which I tend to overuse. Sometimes they backfire, as you demonstrated in one of your examples. Below is a list of things I tend to trip up on, problems I've identified in my practice and want to pick your brain for passe-partout solutions that will work in all contexts. Open-ended structures that will work for whatever the next word. Maybe wishful thinking. Maybe. I don't know about you, but at least for me, I need to have as much as I can on autopilot to even stand a chance of doing these mentally fast speeches. I would be interested to know what your solutions are. So it's very true that I think us Russian to English interpreters, whether we're English A's or English B's, we want to have something, just things that we can fall back on automatically when we hear a Russian sentence opening up in a certain way. And the best way, I think, to do that is just to do it this way, to actually look at specific examples and toss around potential solutions. So, the first set of butt-clenchers that he refers to. Alternatives to we. Yeah, no, in Russian we do a lot of weing. We have to do a lot of weing. And I may even disappoint JB because I do tend to use we. Certainly, you have to know that you're on safe ground when you're using the we. But it's accepted as being a common solution, a common tactic for dealing with these Russian sentences that start, that you just go into the verb or it goes into a reflexive verb, and sometimes we just have to anticipate that what they're going to be talking about is we. Okay, so he says sentences starting with verbs, alternatives to we. In the past, I tried to use what is constructions, but that takes up too much time. What is concerning is, what is of concern is. Every word syllable counts at speed to free up more headspace for processing. Any good solutions for any of these will work in all circumstances regardless of what follows. I'd like to get as many of them as possible on autopilot. Well, the first thing is, JB, I use what as well. In fact, I would say that we and what, just by their nature, are the sort of go-to solution. So if you are using what is concerning, what is of concern, don't feel bad about that. That's what I do. It's what a lot of interpreters do when going from Russian to English. Let's have a look, though, anyway, the specific examples he gives. Окей, не терпят отлагательства и задачи искоренения идеологии экстремизма и терроризма. An urgent issue matter is. Okay, that's very good. What I would probably say, I sort of looked at this earlier, I thought to myself, what is the first thing that would spring to my mind? And it would probably be something like, what is urgent? Okay. With using the what, as you said, one thing I'd certainly say, and that is something you'll see again in the examples that follow, is not to focus too much on the verb. What's more important tends to be the noun. Okay, so the crucial thing here, the noun here is, okay, it's отлагательство, but it's negative. Okay, so you have to have that immediate. You have to immediately think отлагательство. Okay, that's postponement, shall we say? Now, it's a не construction. So what's the opposite of postponement? Okay, it's going to be something urgent, right? So look, вызывает недоумение. That's a very common opener for the Russians, okay? Again, forget the вызывает. So недоумение. Okay, and so he says a source of bewilderment. Sound crap? No, not at all. Not at all. I think that's fine. What's again, I would probably I'd be whatting here. Probably let's say, what is perplexing? What's bewildering? I like that. A sort of source of bewilderment, a source of confusion. So there you go. For that вызывает, you can use like a source of. So I like that, JB. I like that. Okay. And also, so here it says вызывает недоумение то, что. So here it was just the plus noun. Here it's to do with a situation. And the fact is that you either what bewilders us or a source of bewilderment is, you can adapt it. It can go either to the noun. It can either take the noun. For example, what's bewildering is the decision to do this, that, and the other. Or if it's with the то, что, what is bewildering, what's puzzling is that they have decided to draft the report in this way. So it gives you, it leaves your options open. So certainly, don't feel bad about using what. And as I say, a source of is also a good alternative to that. Okay, особое отторжение вызывает. Okay, so again, the important word here is отторжение. Okay, it's like rejection. That's the word you should really be focusing on. So he gives the example. Особое отторжение вызывает использование односторонних санкций для смены неугодных режимов. We take particular issue with, we reject, we oppose. Can't think of anything not involving we. Well, again, all I would say is, JB, don't feel bad about not being finding anything other than we. It's just that's just how Russian syntax is. And English in an English-speaking delegation would say, we reject. Keep it simple, by the way. Okay, that's all that means. Особое отторжение вызывает у нас. So I mean, we know it's going to be about us. Okay, you have to make a judgment call based on the context, but usually it's the delegation expressing the feelings of Russia's feelings about a certain thing. So the chances are that it is going to be we, in which case you go with, we reject. Okay, you don't have to overcomplicate and say something like, we are outraged by. I mean, if it comes to you, that's great, but again, with Russian, it's just often a matter of just getting through it and playing safe, and that whatever that thing is, they don't like it, okay? So we reject. What you'll find, again, with a lot of these examples is that many of them just boil down to either two things, okay? We welcome or we reject, okay? They're either good things or bad things, often with these. Often, there's many different ways of wording it in Russian, but ultimately, so many of them will just boil down to either we support this or we don't support it. Вызывать недоумение, for example. I mean, you could just say we are troubled by. It's obviously something bad. We know it's недоумение. So it's something bad. So if nothing else springs to mind, just go, we're troubled by, we're concerned by. And особое отторжение вызывает. Again, that's bad, we're troubled by. Вызывает разочарование. Okay, this next example that he gives. Okay, we are disappointed by. Okay. But again, that can again just be boiled down to, we are troubled by, we are concerned by. It's a bad thing. Обращает на себя внимание. There's one that comes up a lot. I think what generally springs to mind for me most readily is like what stands out. What stands out is, what's striking is. JB gives what's noteworthy is. That's good as well. Не внушает оптимизм. Again, we know it's a bad thing. So on the one hand, you could say, don't even get too hung up over the word optimism. Okay, we know it's a negative thing. Okay, so again, so what is it? Не внушает оптимизм и ситуация с наркоугрозой. So again, you could just say, okay, literally, we don't feel optimistic about the situation with the drug threat. Okay, but it pretty much means the same as we are troubled by the drug threat. Okay, and again, не вселяет оптимизм данные доклада. Okay, so if you're feeling on form, you can say, we don't feel optimistic about. We don't feel optimistic about the data or the information in the report. But again, we're disturbed by the data in the report. This is another one that comes up quite a few times I've had. Не выдерживают критики. So I must admit that the one that comes to mind most readily for me is what doesn't cut any ice or what doesn't hold water. And that might be just because I've heard this, I've been doing this for quite a lot of years now, and I've heard this expression used a lot. And, it's just like a button. I hear it, не выдерживает критики, and it just comes out like, what doesn't cut any ice or what doesn't hold water. What JB gives us, what doesn't stand up is, which is pretty much along similar lines. What's untenable is, which is again okay. The alternative to going with the what formulation, what doesn't cut any ice, what's untenable, is again weeing. So you could say here, this basically means the same thing as we would call into question the report's assessment, or just we would question, we would query. So, but that one is one you should remember. Can you выдерживать критики? Because I've come across that quite a lot over the years. So of these ones, there's a few that have particularly stand out for me. Вызывает недоумение, obviously. Обращает на себя внимание. This one, не выдерживает критики. The Russians like to say that a lot. Now, moving on, обнадеживает. Okay, now that's a good thing, right? It's good. Okay, so what's encouraging is, if you want to, that's probably what I would do at this point in my career. What's encouraging is, what's heartening is, but also again, we welcome. It's a good thing. We commend. JB gives us promising also. So what's promising is, so yeah, I mean, the fact is that you got pretty much with all these expressions, they boil down to maybe 3 different approaches: the weing, the what, and again here, I guess you could say a source of encouragement is okay. So very broadly speaking, those are maybe the 3 paths that you can take. Again, воодушевляет первая за долгое время информация доклада о контактах правительства, миссии ООН и представителей ЕЛН. So my initial reaction would again be, we welcome, we commend, we are encouraged by. And then you have the opposite, обескураживает. So you know this is a bad thing. And again, here again, it would fit, we are troubled by. Отсутствие уже без малого год какого-либо движения подправки гум-конвоя ввели бы через линии соприкосновения. So again, we are troubled by the absence for almost a year of any movement when it comes to sending in the humanitarian convoy into Idlib via the contact line. Linia соприкосновения. If you're doing a Syrian meeting and you hear that, it's called the contact line, by the way. But anyway, обескураживать, when it's a bad thing, we are concerned by, we are disturbed by, we are troubled by. Okay. Keep it simple, all right? My benchmark, okay, whenever I'm interpreting from Russian, is not what the rest of the room. Yeah, I'm sure you'll know this, by the way, if you watch enough of my episodes. My benchmark is not what the rest of the room thinks, generally, as should be the case. You should be, your audience should be the rest of the room, okay, who are listening things for interpretation. But when it comes to Russian, to be honest, my main client is the Russian minion, the guy who's sitting beside. Generally, if what you say passes muster with him, then you're probably going to be all right. So that's again, yeah, that's just the way it goes. Unfortunately, when you interpret from Russian into English, there's not much room for showboating. You just want to make sure that you keep your man, the min. And then he goes on. Okay, other sentences starting with verbs. Okay, so this is, I think we discussed this in prying apart Russian Butt-Clenchers in episode 66, right? Продолжает успешно функционировать Национальный антитеррористический комитет. I think I mentioned, yeah, whenever I hear продолжает, the first word that springs to mind is still. It's something that's still going on. So I would say something like, if I was to hear that, there is still a functioning National Counter-Terrorist Committee. Okay. Or still successfully functioning is the National Counter-Terrorist Committee. It doesn't sound like great English, but it's plausible. I mean, we could say that in English, okay? So JB gives us there is, or we see the successful. That's a good, again, I think I mentioned that in episode 66, we see, throw in the we see. We see the still successfully functioning National Counter-Terrorist Committee. Okay, past, passive, participle, initial position, plus, instrumental, plus, noun. How do you deal with these structures in simultaneous without the text? Okay, do people actually use the Lynn Visson approach? I guess you guys have the text most of the time. So Lynn Visson, by the way, just so he refers to Lynn Visson. Lynn Visson, actually, she used to work at the UN in New York, and she was actually my trainer when I did my 1 month internship in 2009, just before I passed the test. It was actually with her. It was like a real boot camp, and it helped me massively. So I always have a very soft spot for Lynn Visson, because I think that 1 month's training set me in the best possible stead to become a UN interpreter. So I'll always be very grateful to Lynn. So if you happen to be watching this, Lynn, hello, hope you're doing well. And actually, speaking of Lynn, so Lynn's written some very famous books in the interpretation industry, and this was one of them. From Russian into English, an introduction to simultaneous interpretation. So there's some very good material, very helpful material in that book. Lynn hasn't asked me to put this up, by the way. I haven't seen her in years and years and years, but I thought since the subject got onto her, I've got to give her a sort of plug, a thumbs up, because as I say, she was really very helpful in my early career. So if you ever run into that book, have a read of it. It's very useful. Okay. Getting back to JB's questions then. So he gives a couple of, so I guess you guys have the text most of the time. Obviously, it helps greatly if you have the text, doesn't it? Because then you can just adapt it ahead of time. You can prepare yourself. You can sort of unpackage all those complex compound clauses like this one, okay? So принятые в 2010-2012 году по инициативе российской стороны резолюции Генассамблеи ООН содействовали запуску в рамках десятилетия широкомасштабных акций. So he says, okay, the two approaches that Lynn Visson would suggest. Something was adopted in 2010 and 2012 at the initiative of Russia, namely UNGA resolutions. They helped to launch. This solution seems to work in nearly all cases, JB says. And then he gives a second alternative. Adopted in 2010 and 2012 at the initiative of Russia, UNGA resolutions helped, and then put in a mental comma. You really have to convey that pause with your voice. I find it hard to do this in practice, can sometimes backfire. Well, I think, and then he gives another alternative. We saw the adoption in 2010 and 2012 at the initiative of Russia, UNGA resolutions which helped to, etc. Okay, the one of those that would be my preferred option would probably be then Lynn Visson 2, if I had to do this. Adopted in 2010 and 2012, the initiative of Russia. The GA resolution facilitated the launch as part of the 10-year, whatever it is, sweeping action. Okay, that would probably be my favorite one. However, there's, to be honest, my reaction whenever I hear like that, okay, принятие в 2000, is I often turn the принятие into a noun. So I would probably say the adoption in 2010 and 2012 at the initiative of Russia of the GA resolution facilitated the launch, etc., etc. Now, I'll let you into a little secret. So me and said Mr. JB, we bumped into each other outside the toilets a couple of weeks ago at my work. He was there freelancing, old JB was, and we were discussing his mail, and we discussed this particular sentence, and he says, so when I said to him, okay, I like to do it this way, the adoption in 2012, he did point out quite accurately what he says is that then makes the focus of the sentence the adoption, the act of the adoption, as opposed to the resolution. Okay, so it's clear in the Russian. Okay, it's clear that it was the resolution that facilitated the launch. It wasn't the adoption that facilitated the launch. It's a slight change of emphasis. To which I would say, yes, you're right, but I think it's a nuance. I think that nuance would probably be lost on our friend the Russian mini option 2010, 2011, Russia resolution facilitated. He'd probably be A-okay with it. That's just how I like to do it. But what JB said, it's true what he says. It's not quite the same meaning, but I think it's a sufficiently insignificant nuance that you can be forgiven for doing it. Now, along similar lines, then we move on to, okay, personal pronoun plus verb plus passive participle plus instrumental plus noun. Okay, so some interesting examples he gives here. Полностью поддерживаем выраженную странами-членами в политической декларации твердую приверженность Конвенции ООН против коррупции. Okay. How to deal with the выраженную приверженность. So JB suggests we fully support something that the member states expressed in the political declaration, namely their commitment to the UN Convention Against Corruption. Now, to be honest, when I hear that, like выраженную, that's one of those words, one of those verbs that I tend to think you can just leave out altogether. I don't think the sentence loses anything if you just say, we fully support the member states in the political declaration, their firm commitment to the Convention Against Corruption. I don't think you need to say the expressed. Okay, I think the commitment by itself does enough that it makes the выраженную redundant. Now, another alternative, perhaps you could say, is we fully support the expression, turn it into a noun, okay? We fully support the expression by the member states in the political declaration of their firm commitment to the convention. And that's actually, now I think of it, that's actually quite a nice way of doing it. So when you hear выраженную, you just say, turn it into the expression, okay? And in fact, that alternative I've given you, it's quite similar, isn't it, to what JB gives here when he says past passive participle plus instrumental apostrophe. So we fully support the member states' firm commitment expressed. Yeah, that would work as well. I don't think if you wanted to really, as I say, give to render the выраженную in the political declaration to UNCAC, risky, could backfire, like in the next example. Okay, we'll see what the next example is, but I think it's a fairly safe bet. Okay, so what is the next example? Такой подход противоречит зафиксированному и поддержанному всеми странами-членами в повестке 2030 балансу трех измерений устойчивого развития. And here JB gives us two solutions. And actually, I quite like both of them. So the first one is, this approach is at odds with the member states' support in the 2030 agenda for the balance between the three dimensions of sustainable development. So he basically skips the ЗАФИКСИРОВАННЫЙ. And I think that is, again, one of those words like выраженную, where the meaning, the idea that it's enshrined is sort of implicit. Don't know if that's a shift in meaning. So what he means there is that, okay, what it runs counter to is the balance, okay? What the Russians want it to run counter to is the balanso, okay? Now, when you're rendering it in the English with this approach, it sounds that what the approach runs counter to is the support. The approach is at odds with the member states' support, okay? So yes, like in the previous example that I gave you with the adoption, okay, the adoption of the resolution, where I shifted the emphasis from the resolution to the act of adoption. Here there's a shift from the balance to the act of support. Again, I think it's sufficiently insignificant that you can get away with it. I would say that's my humble opinion. He gives the other option here, and I quite like this option as well. Where you go in with the what. This approach is at odds with what was enshrined and supported by the member states in the 2030 agenda. He says drop the other verb. I mean, you could if you want, but I think that is also a legitimate way of doing it. This approach runs counter to or contradicts what was enshrined and supported by all member states in Agenda 2030, namely the balance of, yes, you need to put in the namely the balance. That's to say the balance. You have to throw in one of these things to keep the meaning. So I think you could basically, either of these options that JB gives are legitimate, and it's up to you just to see which one you are more comfortable with. That is my humble opinion. Another example he gives here. В этой связи призываем все государства выполнить свои международные обязательства с опорой на закрепленный в ГКС принцип либо выдай, либо суди. Okay, so here he says Okay, here we call on states to meet their international commitments based on something enshrined, set forth, named the principle. That's the Lynn Visson approach, he says. I don't know if I don't know if that is her approach. Is that her approach? I don't like the something. I think here I would probably go on the second alternative he gives, based on the GCT's strategy, on the principle of. I think here that zakreplony again is it's redundant, just as it would be, I think, if it was soporena priniative GKS princip. You know, it's there, okay? There's no doubt, you know, it's implicit, it's a principle, okay? It's their principle, and it exists, so you don't need to really say that it's been enshrined or adopted. So my inclination would be to go with the second option that JB suggests there. And again here, поддерживаем закрепленный в данном документе межсекторальный подход. So again, he gives a couple of different options here. We support that which is what's set forth in the document, namely the intersectoral approach. Or with the apostrophe, we support the document's intersectoral approach. Now, or weight, the intersectoral approach in the document, the weight. I'd like the Lynn Visson approach. I'd probably go with what. We support what's enshrined or stipulated in this document, namely the intersectoral approach. Also, if he's going very fast, also a lot depends how fast the speaker's going. We support the document's intersectoral approach. I like that also. I do quite like that apostrophe approach, if you can spot it. Again, the other question is, can you spot? The question mark is, can you spot that it's going in that direction? I think that's a very slick solution. We support the document's intersectoral approach. Okay, what about this one? Считаем, что закрепленные четверть века назад в кайрском программе приоритеты сохраняют свою актуальность. So again, here, my initial reaction would be to go with a what. We think that what was enshrined 25 years ago in the Cairo program, namely the priorities, are still relevant. And so JB gives a few alternatives here. We believe that something that was set forth a quarter of a century ago in the Cairo program, namely that priorities, are still relevant. Yeah, I don't know if I'm a big fan of this using the something. I think I would just sooner go with what. We think that what was set forth a quarter of a century ago, namely the priorities, are still relevant. Do you omit считаем? That's something, I think I mentioned that in episode 66, that I'll often drop the think. But again, dealing with that compound clause, you've still got to go about it the same way. The enshrinement 25 years ago in the Cairo program of the priorities is still relevant. Again, there's a slight shift in meaning, okay? You're shifting the meaning from the priorities to the enshrinement. Again, I would say that I think you can probably get away with it. So that's the thing with Russian again. Often it's a matter of what can you get away with. And then he gives a third option. A quarter of a century ago in the Cairo program, priorities were set which are still relevant today. The only thing there I would say is you're leaving a lot of words. You're just missing all that считаем, что закрепленные. You know, on the face, you know, when you read it like that, it seems like quite. You've got to strike a balance between what looks good on paper when you just do it like this, looking at it, and you have the time to reflect, and how you're actually going to naturally react when you hear the words coming at you. And I think you would have to have real balls of steel just to let считаем, что закрепленные, let that go under pressure. That's my impression anyway. I think I'd feel the need to say something, hearing those first three words. Считаем, что закрепленные. And we'll finish with this one for today, part 1. So I'll definitely have to do a part 2. На этом фоне особую озабоченность вызывает возрастающее количество учреждаемых Советом по правам человека мандатов по страновым сюжетам. Okay, I'm not going to look. I've forgotten what it says in the right-hand column. So my initial reaction to this would be, in that light, we are particularly concerned at the growing number of what's been instituted by the Human Rights Council in terms of mandates on country issues. So that's my initial reaction, okay? I wasn't looking, I wasn't prepared, I was just trying to ride with it. So JB gives the example, against this backdrop of concern, okay, is the growing number of HRC country-specific mandates. Skip учреждаемые. So it's an interesting approach, actually. It's an interesting strategy. And I'm seeing it come to light here as we actually make the episode, where you drop the verb and then you turn whatever the noun is, whatever the subject that is doing the verb, you turn it into a possessive. The growing number of Human Rights Council mandates on country issues. And it's an interesting approach. See, look at that. I'm making this episode, and I'm seeing something new here. So here, yeah, I guess it's the same idea. We support this document's intersectoral approach, and you just ignore the verb, the закрепленный. It's an interesting approach. I don't know if it works with sufficient regularity to be able to rely on it as a sort of bailout option. That's the only thing I would say. Certainly it does work in certain contexts, but to have it as your fallback option is a bit of a stretch. But it's very interesting. I'm going to keep an eye on how this develops. Okay, guys, we're going to stop here. As I said, a lot of material here that JB, bless him, has sent him. Really interesting stuff. Real, as I say, food for thought. Please do put in your own suggestions in the comments box. If you have any good ideas as well, any better ideas that me or JB have had, as usual, smash like button, subscribe, share, and all that sort of thing. I'm going to definitely come back and do a second episode of these Butt-Clenchers, as I think I will term them. I think when it comes to interpreting from Russian, it's just really good to just sit down and discuss this calmly. Guys, thank you. I think that's pretty much it for today's episode. Keep following me on the LinkedIn page, on the LinkedIn group. Keep commenting. Yep. Keep contributing stuff. All feedback is much appreciated by the Interpretation Station. Nothing more to be said other than that episode 93 of the Interpretation Station stands adjourned.